because of the way that adults have a
Mhm.
different developmental. I mean, we're relatively neurologically developed to our peak, and we have certain logical
Mhm.
processes that kids don't have. The inferences that we were making as adults surrounding technology in bridging this gap during the pandemic was they made sense.
Yeah.
Kids can still see me. They can still read my body language. I'm still going to be speaking to them in human voice. Like the literal only thing that's different is that I'm not standing 2 feet away from them.
Mhm.
That should be fine.
Welcome to another episode of Larry's Pod, where we explore the latest trends and trends on innovation and challenges in the IT world. So today we will be having a conversation with Claire Smizer, a guest with an incredible journey in the educational field. She started with 6 impactful years in the classroom and then transitioned to EdTech in 2020, if I'm not wrong. And since then, she's been establishing herself on a huge success supporting teachers and customizing training programs until becoming a really great customer success person in the field. So I know you have some breaking records numbers there, tons of like engagement and engagement rates, and also really good numbers for everyone to know. You can talk about that in another moment, or if you want, just touch base on that. But at the end, I'm super happy to have you here in this session. I'm looking forward to learning from you. And for today, we will be touching base on the integration of technology in modern education, the challenges and opportunities that brings. So, welcome, Claire. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you so much. That was an incredible intro. I'm gonna have to live up to that.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
let's get it. How like let's start with a question that I have from
Sure.
the top of my head, which is like, as I just said, you've been working a lot of time with education, and right now, like with technology and involving more and more in this like changing world, I would say. So, how, from your perspective, which are those significant changes or advancements that you have faced, and how have that impacted both on teaching and student experiences?
Sure. So definitely in the last 15, 20 or so years, we've seen a massive trend
Mhm.
toward innovative technologies, personalized learning experiences, obviously the advent and integration of AI, and whether or not we feel like we want it in the classroom, it's there. Kids are using it. Um, all kinds of really interesting things. The thing that for me is maybe the most interesting as I step back and think through or evaluate educational technology, the piece that sticks with me is less about the actual technology that we implement and some of the standard truths of students that as adults we sometimes forget. So during
Mhm.
the pandemic, when I was just in process of transitioning into EdTech, there was this thought surrounding technology being the savior of education in this time of
Yep.
home schooling, hybrid learning, that kind of thing. And what we learned really quickly as an educational institution is that for adults, that was great. We manage our time pretty well. We've had socialization so we can handle online interactions. It
Mm.
didn't work well for students. And I think for a lot of adults, teachers included, that was surprising that technology wouldn't step in and have the leveling effect or the continued effect that a teacher might have in a classroom, even when you had a live person on video. So I think in kind of a dichotomous framework that all of the really interesting things that we've seen develop in education over the last several years are incredibly powerful, but they don't make up for the
Mhm.
human
Mhm.
interaction that students need in order to develop as tiny people. I mean, I have two little girls at home, 5 and 4, and during the pandemic for them, they were not in school yet. they got to be around their grandparents all the time. We were kind of closed off, but we
Yeah.
still had family. But it was interesting watching them go to preschool for the first time and, quote, post pandemic, and recognizing that there are other children in the world. And I don't necessarily know how
Yeah.
to interact with another child because I've had myself and my sister and I only interact with adults. So I think that was something that was a little startling. And it's important for, this, I'm sure everybody
Hmm.
has this in mind now, but it's really important for us as a global society, us as an American society, here in the States, and from an education perspective, to remember that technology has its
Yeah.
place and its value, but it is not
Mhm.
all things to all people. And I think that was a very sobering, it was
Yeah.
good. It was humbling, but it was a very sobering experience, a very sobering fact for a lot of education during the pandemic, that it has its limitations just like anything else, but also super empowering for educators in that the role that you play, even though it evolves over time and it's moving toward less of a sage on the stage and more of a facilitator, your role is still
Hmm.
impossible to replicate. You're still the core of the classroom. That human interaction is still critical to development and cannot be substituted with any form of
Yeah,
technology,
and
no
I
matter how
guess
advanced.
it existed like an extra challenge that you needed, like you needed to fill that gap between like now being completely isolated, or like through a video call or some technology that you started using,
Yeah.
plus that other side of the humanity, like the human contact that you lose completely. So I guess there was like a huge challenge also for coaches, teachers, like to use that technology, but at the same time try to fill that gap of like not being able to be playing around with another human.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think the other piece that was so interesting as adults, because of the way that uh, adults have a
Hmm.
different developmental. We're relatively neurologically developed to our peak, and we have certain logical
Hmm.
processes that kids don't have. The inferences that we were making as adults surrounding technology in bridging this gap during the pandemic was they made sense.
Yeah.
Kids can still see me. They can still read my body language. I'm still going to be speaking to them in human voice. Like, the literal only thing that's different is that I'm not standing 2 feet away from them.
Hmm.
That should be fine. And what we found was that that makes a huge
Yeah.
difference. And I think about um, having worked at a brain computer interface company for a little bit. I'm very interested in
Mm.
neurological phenomenon and the development of the brain before, but also specifically as a result of working there. I think back to a study done about infants and elderly folks, that when they stop having like not students, children in babies in the neonatal care that don't have the level of touch that an infant does that doesn't have some
Hmm.
pre-existing condition at birth, or the elderly, particularly the elderly who are in a care facility and don't get
Yeah.
the physical touch, the having a person in the same room talking to them. There's a failure to thrive that happens at a greater rate than
Hmm.
would just naturally happen. So I think the phenomenon there is that it doesn't just hold true for, the elderly and for infants. It holds true for probably all of us. And maybe as adults we don't recognize that in ourselves as much, or we're able to cope and kind of mitigate that effect. But for children, that is what we have
Oh,
found, is that's very true. That having that physical presence of someone for whatever neurological, psychological reasons exist, that
hmm.
is a huge player in child development. To say nothing of the fact that for students who school was
Hmm.
their only safe space,
Sure.
that's a big deal too. So I think, again, there was this reductive thinking, and not from everybody by any means. I mean, you had a lot of people that were way ahead of this and knew what was coming, or could foretell what was coming before it did. But there was this highly reductive sense that everything,
Hmm.
we'll just go hybrid, it'll be fine, or we'll just go remote, it'll be fine, it'll just be for a little bit. But I think, again, thinking in a very reductive lens, that didn't serve many students well, if
Yeah.
any students well. um, and not just for the and again, not just for the safety and that kind of thing, but for that physical presence. There is something to do with that makes a big difference in the lives of
That's
children as
crazy.
they
I mean,
develop.
it makes total sense that now that you say it, but yeah, you have to face it
Mm,
until you realize that that's actually how things go, right? Because as you were saying, like kids are completely different. Like they have not developed some skills or some
mm.
parts of their brain, I would say, or I'm not technical on that side, but I can imagine that yeah, humans like developed humans can already substitute or mitigate that risk from previous experiences because we already passed through that, but they didn't. They were just facing that for the
Yeah.
very first time. So can you think or imagine of any like because at that point in time something that for sure that came to play a big role was technology, as you were saying. So were there like
Oh,
any
for sure.
specifics or some implementations through technology that helped like mitigating that or accelerating the way kids incorporating those previously human related interfaces or interactions?
Yeah, I think again, not that you can substitute that exactly, but schools that were
Mm-hmm.
particularly proactive with creating
Mm-hmm.
student communities, so not just
Yeah.
going to class and leaving, but that created spaces for students to speak about feelings and to find time to just chat and be kids. That was a big deal. The going
Yeah.
going back to this kind of the hallmark of education for a lot of
Mm-hmm.
students is the
Mm-hmm.
socialization function. And so, like, I think back to myself when I was in elementary or junior high or recess, and how much less rich my academic experience would have been if I didn't have
Mm-hmm.
recess
Oh yeah.
or lunch, that kind of thing. So, the schools that were in my experience, having talked with teachers and administrators, the schools that were proactive in providing those student spaces that naturally occur during the school day,
Mm-hmm.
you almost don't even think about them, passing periods,
Yeah.
time in the bathroom to chat, um, that replicated or recreated semi
Mm-hmm.
artificial versions of those, saw typically better behavior rates. They typically saw greater attendance rates. They definitely saw less in the way of needing significant counseling, as far as I understand. Um, it'll be interesting to see what studies are done after now that we're kind of in this semi post pandemic place. It'll be interesting to see what studies are done on interventions that schools took using,
Yeah.
I mean, you had to use technology, but interventions that schools took and the outcome for students when they came back. How many kids had to come back and be on depression medication or ADHD medication as a result of not getting those interactions or not having structured environments. The other thing that was particularly impactful during this period of time, and thank goodness that it was already in the works, was the
Mm.
phenomenon of
Oh yeah.
personalized learning experiences. So there is something to be said for too. A human, a human teacher automatically differentiates learning, even if it's not significant. It can be something as simple as, if the two of us are in a class and our teacher walks by and you understand the word that she
Mm-hmm.
just said, but I don't, it can be as simple as her turning to me and
Yeah.
saying, oh, that word means blah, blah, something easy, all the way to having, crazy different things for all these kids. Your special education, kinder teachers, those guys are great at, like, every kid has their own thing. Um, Although, I mean, there's a special place for those people in wherever we go after we're alive. But anyway, the personalized learning that was already in place with
Mm-hmm.
places like Khan Academy and iExcel to some extent, those were incredibly helpful, as it allowed for differentiation that maybe
Mm-hmm.
wasn't as obvious in an online classroom. So my mom was an online teacher during the pandemic. Her class went fully online, and one of the things I remember her talking about quite a bit was, so she couldn't see the kids' work, so she couldn't tap on their
Yeah.
paper and say, "Hey, 4 minus 2 isn't 3." You know, you went too fast or whatever. And in this online classroom environment, and I think we see this a lot with
Mm-hmm.
anybody doing hybrid or remote work, there's not the natural ebb and flow of conversation where you might have somebody finishing a thought and somebody piggybacking in an online
Yeah.
environment. At least to me, it feels like you get a lot more interruption. Like I can't tell that you were about to start talking because none of the normal cues were there and your audio's delayed.
Yeah.
And so I start to, anyway, so that's their whole thing. So you don't get to have the subsets of conversation happening that you do in a
Hmm.
classroom where a teacher can, inject themselves into a brief little conversation and then move along. In the online environment, you
Yeah.
have one channel of audio and that's it. So I think that personalized learning experience was quite a benefit to some students. And I will say, I don't know how this works economically. So this is obviously, foregoing the financial part of this. One of the things that in my mind was
Hmm.
unacceptable during the pandemic was that access to tools
Hmm.
that we know work with students, particularly personalized learning platforms,
Mm.
were not available to all students, and were particularly not available to students in
Yeah.
poorer regions of the US. I mean, worldwide, I won't even get into that, but
Yeah.
students of color, students living in poverty, students living in near poverty, urban students, like those kids didn't, or rural students too, those kids didn't have access to some of the tools that students in other environments who were likely already thriving just
Hmm.
because of socioeconomic advantages uh, didn't get all of that stuff. And so I don't know what the economics behind that would look like. Like, I don't know if a state steps in and says, hey, for during this time, we're all going to use this platform that works really nicely. That could
Yeah.
potentially kill a lot of other vendors doing really good things. I don't know. But I feel like there should have been unfettered access to at least a tool that had
Yeah.
efficacy based research that showed growth. And maybe you choose and it comes out of some giant state or federal pot. I don't know. But that was another thing that I found a
That.
little concerning,
Yeah.
was that rather than rallying around like we got to make sure that we're just making it through this and everybody's going to be
Hmm.
okay, it was like, let them
Yeah.
figure it out. Be all right. Like that.
Absolutely. I mean,
That's not how
and
that
that's
works.
huge because like in a space like this, like they are the future. So if you don't provide them with tools to actually be able to thrive and not lose 5 years or 4 years of their life in key moments, because this is like super key. And if you miss those 5 years, then it's going to be harder like to get into the world. Like you will be probably it will be harder for you to find a good job or to get expertise in the field you would like to. And yeah, I don't know either how that works, but I guess companies that already had that solution in place, they wanted to take the most out of it, like from the economical standpoint. And governments were like probably pushing, but not enough, or they didn't have the tools like to make a global tool available for everyone. Um,
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't obviously, capitalism is king here. So I'm
mhm.
I'm sure there was some of that. I don't even think it was necessarily like the let's get the pie, like let's get as much of the pie as we can. I mean, the US in particular, we were so caught with our pants down that it was like we were in panic catch up mode for such a long time that the focus was on
Yeah.
survival rather than how we get through and still are successful. So I don't know that there was any. I mean, I'm sure there was some ill intent from some people, and I know there was definitely good intent from others. It was just so
Hmm. Hmm.
constantly behind the eight ball that it was like we can't be worrying about that. Like we just got to make sure that these kids are like even here, and like how are we going to make sure that parents can go to work, and like
Yeah.
what's our plan, instead of. And I don't know. I mean, obviously, I wasn't in charge, and I don't know that I would have done anything better. But there wasn't. It didn't feel like to me there was much of a like, okay, this is
Mhm.
clearly here to stay. That was another feeling that, at least in California, that I got. That was like,
Yeah.
2 more months, we'll be out of this. And that clearly wasn't the case. Every time we extended it, it was like, well, maybe we just plan on the next couple of years being this way. And if we go
Hmm.
back in person, that's great. But there didn't seem to be this. There wasn't the kind of forethought planning that I would have hoped to see. And pandemic level events aren't unheard of. I
Hmm.
mean, we had one a century ago. You don't, I mean, you don't want to sit there thinking about like the worst things that could possibly happen, but we
Yep.
have disaster relief funds, organizations for a reason. this is just one of those disasters. And so even though it doesn't happen very often, though there's now evidence that it's
Yeah.
going to speed up and you
Yeah.
may start having this more often, why, like, it's just one of the things you plan for. And knowing that life during that time is never going to be
Mhm.
easy or perfect or whatever, but you can still plan ahead, much like people plan ahead for
Absolutely.
earthquakes and people plan ahead for hurricanes. And it's, I don't know I don't know what about it is different, but there is a different feeling, like, or at least there was where I was, where I was teaching, where I was living, that it's like, well,
Yeah.
like, this just can't happen. Like, just doesn't, like, this just doesn't happen here.
And
Like, well, it does,
let me
and now it is.
you made a
So
point there, and that makes me like think about like what would you do in case, like, because as you said, like we should be prepared for the next wave that is coming, because we know that this is not going to stop, and like it's been happening through all the human life. So if you have to pick or think on anything that you could implement the next time something like this happens, what would that be? Like, what would a change in there be? Maybe globalization for everyone to have access to the tools, or maybe crazier than that, I don't know, augmented reality, some in place schooling, I don't know, what would that be if you.
I think the simplest thing in my mind is, it kind of
Mhm.
goes back to that financial piece. I think what makes the most sense is that we have financial components
Mhm.
built in for other disasters. Just
Mhm.
put money aside so that there is this fund. I don't know if it's
Yeah.
global, regional. I don't know who
Mhm.
manages it. It doesn't matter. Um, but you have this fund that you estimate can last you
Yeah.
for X years, whatever. And from an education perspective, you've got a list of vendors, all that have efficacy based research. So there's nobody in there that's like, yeah, like, we do this thing,
Mhm.
but actually we don't. So you have to apply to be a vendor, you have to be vetted, you have to have research backed, you probably need an ESSA certification, whatever you would need, NSTA
Yeah. Yeah.
approval, I don't know, whatever. But you're on this vendor list, and if something happens, then basically what what your schools and your districts, however you want to aggregate them, local level, state level, federal, national, whatever that looks like, they've got this pot of money to draw from that they've secretly been putting into for years, or that taxpayers have, or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of things that I'd be happy to pop my tax dollars into that, as opposed to other
Yeah.
things. Like, I'm good with that. Um, but so, like, during a time like this, you can pull from anybody on this vendor list. You've got X amount to spend, or there's this kind of locked in rate that, like, everybody on this vendor list is going to be paid this much per X,
Mhm.
per child, per month, whatever it looks like, so that at least there's a net. I mean, if it goes past that,
Yeah.
you have to figure it out. You make something happen. If it goes shorter than that, you just retain that money. But it, in my mind, it all comes down to opportunity, availability, and economic feasibility, right? So if you can remove the economic piece by simply
Mhm.
planning ahead, which, I mean, like, as a species, we're not super great at, but
Yeah.
still we could be. Um, then what you need to focus on is who's on your list, what are your parameters, and how do you get it to other people. So if you've got kids in a non-connected space, you're dropping in tablets or Chromebooks that are preloaded with this software that already can do the things, and if they need to sub out, then they can go to local internet hubs.
Yeah.
Like, India is a good example of that, where they've got local places you can go and work on things, or update your computer and then go back to a place that doesn't have internet and be fine. um,
Yeah.
there needs to be something, and that doesn't even begin to cover, like, war torn areas and what you would do for students there. That I don't know, but I think a lot of human problems, which we bring on ourselves, could just be
Yeah,
solved with some
absolutely.
simple
Yeah, yeah.
planning.
Planning ahead and just trying to imagine what would that scenario be and just get
Yeah,
prepared for that. Then you can iterate and adapt based on what goes on. But yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
and just be realistic.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, yeah. You don't
again,
need to have a huge like net that
happens.
can support everything. You just need something that helps you
Yeah,
like not fail in the moment it happens, and you are just prepared for that. Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
it's when you have a hurricane coming, you go out
absolutely.
and get
Yeah.
enough food to survive the couple of days you
Hmm.
think you're going to be in the house. This is the same thing, and as you get more data on these global events, You start getting more information on about how long should we have in the bank? What do we need to have as a percentage of buffer? Was that enough money? Did we struggle to get these things to these
Mhm.
students in this part of the world, and what's the solve? I mean,
Yeah,
the really good part is you have
absolutely.
brilliant people available to you to solve these problems who could probably sit down in a very short period of time and have some like, this is the solution. And I think
Mhm.
it's silly for us as a global citizenry, the US, however you want to break it down. It's silly for us to think that keeping that knowledge to ourselves
Mhm.
is somehow beneficial. One of the things I think about, it's kind of a pivot, but one of the things I think about pretty regularly when you had mentioned like the kids are our future, not even just in the emotional, like kids are our future sense, we have huge global shortages underway
Mhm.
or that are coming. So, like by 2032, we will be 10 million healthcare workers short. We have an aging population, we've got higher standards of living, people are living longer, people are expecting to get paid more. All of those things combine to create a healthcare worker shortage. That is to say nothing of other shortages. But just from a healthcare lens, a $10 million, or sorry, 10 million person healthcare worker shortage,
Yeah.
that's insane. And the students that go through events like this or experience traumatizing things, war, poverty, food insecurity, whatever those things look like, those are the students that do not stand as likely a chance to be able to participate meaningfully in any kind of
Mhm.
career based work. We're just cutting ourselves off at the knees. I mean, this is what I think of too. Like, I think about this with my kids.
Yeah.
They didn't choose to come into the world. I chose to bring them into the world. And so, therefore, it's my responsibility globally, it's ours as adults, our responsibility to make sure that those students, those children, have the best opportunity
Yep.
level. I mean, like, are my kids having bonbons every morning for breakfast? No, for several reasons, but also like not highest or not most
Mhm.
expensive, but highest quality. When we look at the things that students need to be successful, we know what they are.
Yep.
There's no secret.
Uh,
They need security, food, shelter, care, and
Absolutely.
space.
Yeah, we
They
don't
need
have to invent
physical
anything
space.
crazy
They need to
here.
be able to
Like it's
interact.
the same thing once again.
Yeah,
So yeah, totally.
it was the
Yep.
same thing it was
Yep.
a
Yep.
1,000 years, 10,000 years. The same things that kids need to be successful or what students need
Yeah.
to be successful. We
Mhm.
know what those things are. And at this point, it's our responsibility. I mean, we're the ones who are going to suffer when there's not enough doctors to take care of us when we're 90 and
Yep.
we're, you know, dying
Yeah,
but aren't
absolutely.
dying quickly enough. Like, that's going to be on us. So I think about that a lot. That when we talk about the kids or the future, it feels very
Mhm.
nebulous, but that's a real
Mhm.
world example, a very soon to be happening tangible example of the adult population in a lot of ways failing young people. And the young people, I mean, obviously those people suffer as a result, but so do we. So it's not,
Yep.
like, it's not like a, well, that's not my
Yeah, it's
problem type of
absolutely
thing.
is. So yeah, completely agree. Well, Claire, I know we are kind of coming to an end here. So oh yeah,
I could talk to you
I
for
mean,
hours. You don't want to just stay on for like 3 more hours
love
and solve the world's
love that
problems?
energy. And yeah, you are talking like touching super interesting points, and like it's going to keep impacting our lives today, the
Mm,
future of kids tomorrow. So yeah, for me this is like a super interesting topic, and we should not stop talking about
mm.
that, because the only way to keep
No,
moving forward and
absolutely.
to keep like making changes and getting prepared for what's coming is to keep talking, keep thinking about solutions, keep trying to, from what we can, like provide support either through some software that we do, or some, I don't know, going to a college to teach someone some subject or anything.
Absolutely.
I think that's vital for us, like as a human race, right? And yeah, I mean,
Absolutely.
I don't know, Claire, if you have something else you want to share with the people, with the community, or something you want to advise. I have one last question also that it's not related to this topic, but I love asking it. And so, yeah, I mean, if you have something else you want to share with the audience, go ahead.
My only piece of advice would be to be an advocate
Mm-hmm.
for what you know is right. The vast majority of people, we all feel very strongly about the growth and development of our young people. Attend local school board meetings. Listen to the people in charge of your educational institutions. Question motivations. Ask for proof.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be satisfied. Is kind of my never be satisfied. Maybe is the go to piece of advice that I would
Love
give
that.
people.
Love that. Thank you, Claire. So, yeah, time for the last question.
Yeah.
So, do you have any personal habits, routine, practices, something that you implement to keep healthy and like to maintain your work life balance? I know you being like super pushing on the subjects, and you've been super successful from the uh, I would say business side of things. But I know you are also on communities trying to help. Is that what makes you keep the balance, or do you have any other like habit or routine for that?
Yeah, I would not be a great example of work life balance. That would be, I mean, if you talk to anybody about like things I need to do better, it would be
It's
that.
good to know though.
Um, I'm terrible at that. But here's what I will say: I never feel like I have a work
Mm-hmm.
life balance problem because the work that I do is fulfilling and the people that I talk to are fulfilling. So like I don't walk out of conversations like this feeling
Mm-hmm.
drained. I walk out feeling energized. So not that every job is going to feel that way and not that every conversation feels that way, but finding something that brings you joy, family, community, whatever that looks like, and being involved in it and being very passionate about it, I find that helps
Mm-hmm.
mitigate any of the stress that comes from any of the other things in my life. So, and also just kind of like, I know we talk about work life balance a lot, like people will talk about what that means to them. It really is an individual, like, I know some people who are very like, I work 8 hours, I
Yeah.
have the rest of my time with my family.
Mm-hmm.
That is perfect. Then there's folks like me who are like, I'll work 24 hours in a row
Yeah.
if I don't feel like I'm working. You know, that's
Yeah. One,
it's all a perspective. And as long as you're
absolutely.
happy with
Yeah.
it, great. And if you're not happy with it, don't come and ask me how to change it because I don't know.
I love that. Yeah, great suggestion there. But yeah, that's super like impactful too. Like if you are working on something that doesn't feel like it's work, then it's probably the best thing you can do, and just try to keep that going.
Yeah.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Appreciate you for this time, for your
Thank
insights,
you.
and I hope you enjoyed. And
I loved it. Thank you for having me.
thank
This
you
was a
so much.
blast.
Have a good one.